Hello and welcome to Follow Me and Die. I'm your host, Larry Hamilton, and today on the Follow Me and Die YouTube channel is the inaugural episode in the series, How to AD&D 1E. I want to give a little bit about my background. I started playing Dungeons & Dragons way back in 7th grade in 1977, and for the math on that, that's 42 years, so some call me old. I'm not that old. I'm not retired yet. I've got a ways to go for that, unfortunately. And the version of D&D I started with was the original D&D Basic set, many call the Holmes Blue Box Basic by Dr. John Holmes, and I'll discuss that a little more in depth later in the video. And in that, it told us that when it came out, of course, you needed to get Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which of course we did as each book came out. When future versions of Basic came out, we had the opinion, oh, that's for babies because we're playing Advanced. And since then, online and at conventions and so forth, I've run across other people that they had a similar experience, that if they started with AD&D, they had a low opinion of the basic versions that followed. However, thanks to the OSR and reading lots of online articles, there's some interesting things in those other basic versions by either Tom Moldvay or Frank Mentzer. So check those out for a little history lesson if you wish. Both, I believe, are available through DriveThruRPG, which I'll link down below. Interestingly enough, way back then I was a big science fiction nerd, and while I still like science fiction and play science fiction type games, there was something about D&D that hooked my interest, and we always came back to AD&D. We'd take a break and do something else for a few sessions, but we always came back to AD&D. AD&D's had a big influence on me. As a matter of fact, the Follow Me and Die name for all my social media is based on my favorite AD&D character, who I talk about on my blog quite frequently, and I explain the meaning of that in different YouTube videos and on my blog, so I won't bother you with that explanation here. I started blogging 10 years ago. This coming summer will be 10 years. I played an online AD&D game for 4.5 years on Roll20. It wrapped up this past fall. I've run an online AD&D game on Roll20 and played in another that's currently on hiatus. I've got a different portion of my campaign world for the online game than what I have for my home game. Unfortunately, my sons have gotten busy now that they're grown and have lives of their own. I don't know when we'll get to play again, but I look forward to that. I also run the occasional AD&D game at conventions. In this series, I'll answer various questions people propose. I'll cover things like character generation, combat, monsters, and pretty much anything you can think of. I decided to launch this new series on YouTube yesterday after a tweet showed up in my Twitter feed from Bill Allen. He was asking if there were any YouTube channels focused on Advanced D&D, first edition specifically. And while there may be other channels, and since I wasn't aware of any, I got the bug and I decided I needed to do a new series. My plan is to have one new episode in the series each month. This introductory episode will not count towards that for April. I hope to get my first episode in before the end of the month. And also I will continue my Roll20 for the Absolute Beginner series. So approximately every 2 weeks, I anticipate a new episode for one series or the other. If you have a specific question about first edition AD&D, you can use the hashtag HowToAD&D1E, preferably on Twitter or other social media, and I will add that to the list of growing questions. I already have quite a few, and I must point out that I do have a Patreon, and members of my Patreon will get preference on how soon their question is addressed versus those who are not members of my Patreon. I'll point out that in addition to blogging for over 10 years, I've had a podcast, also called Follow Me and Die, on Anchor and many other places since June, and I've been publishing RPG supplements on DriveThruRPG since August. Many of them are pay what you want. 2 of them are copper sellers, and I have Conventions I go to regularly: GaryCon, Gamehole Con, UConn in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and Marmalade Dog in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I also try to make it to Grand Con in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And there are a few other cons I try to squeeze in as time off and finances allow. Coming up next, I'll give a quick overview of the resources that were originally available for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition, and places that you can obtain them, both originals and PDFs and print-on-demand copies through DriveThruRPG. There will be a ton of links down below, all of the ones to DriveThruRPG or DM's Guild. They are all linked to the same account, so if you get it through one, you'll have it in the other. They'll all be affiliate links. I look forward to your upcoming questions, and I really want to thank Bill Allen for giving me the idea and all of your interest. I hope to live up to it. And now, a quick overview of the original AD&D material. And this, to me, is Dungeons & Dragons. When I think of D&D, this is the first image that pops into my mind. This is the first D&D Basic by Dr. Eric Holmes. Originally it was seen as an organization, an introduction, and quick explanation of how to play the original D&D from the Little Brown Books and supplements. It only went to 3rd level. Back in 7th grade, my brother convinced me to buy this, and he was our first dungeon master, and from then we were hooked. As I mentioned, it only went to 3rd level, but it had monsters of much higher level. In recent years, the Blue Home Journeyman rules were kickstarted and takes the ideas behind the Holmes Blue Box Basic to 20th level. I happen to back this Kickstarter, and I've actually yet to review this book. This is the one printed through DriveThruRPG. It's got the old school look and feel. So if you're interested in origins of the game, check that out. Holmes Blue Box told us that we had to get Advanced Dungeons & Dragons when it came out. This is one of my original books. I got this for Christmas the year it came out from my parents. And in the midst of the so-called satanic panic, we happened to be at my aunt and uncle's house, and my aunt said, "Are you sure it's a good idea to let him have that?" And my mom said, "It's just a game." I know because I've read it, and that shut him up. I did grow up in a small town where you kind of had to be careful who you let know played. I happen to be the president of the science fiction book club that we founded in high school, and we mostly played games. We called it that to avoid trouble with the troublemakers. You can see this is well worn. It's been through a lot. This is my table copy. I still use it. It's also the copy that I have big name people sign when I'm at conventions. Unfortunately, I'll never get Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson to sign it. There's also the Monster Manual. This is the second cover by Jeff Easley. My original books, all except my Player's Handbook and Oriental Adventures, got destroyed in a water leak, and I managed to rebuild my collection. You can read about that on my blog. Actually, the Monster Manual came out first, so when that came out, we had more monsters to use with our Holmes Blue Box. Next to come out was the Player's Handbook, so then we had more classes and racial options. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide came out. And when that came out, we stopped using Holmes Blue Box because we had 3 new books. And as each book came out, we devoured all that was in them. This is one of the books I picked up when I was trying to rebuild my collection. You can see it's in pretty rough shape. And over the years, other books came out. Next, I believe, was the Fiend Folio. It was a effort from Great Britain. A lot of people have strong opinions one way or the other about that. Some love the art, some hate the art, some hate the whole book. It doesn't matter. If you like it, use it. Well, somewhere in there, came out the Dungeon Master screen. In 2 parts. I'm not sure which order the next ones came out, but I believe Deities and Demigods. This is one with the Cthulhu mythos. That cost about $70 for that one. I've got one in better shape that cost about $90. Then there was Unearthed Arcana. And I believe Oriental Adventures came out next, followed by the second Monster Manual. And then there were a few other supplemental books that came out over the years. The Dungeoneer Survival Guide focused on the depths and the Underdark and mining and all other kinds of things. The Wilderness Survival Guide that gave more ideas for dealing with the wilderness. The Manual of the Plains that fleshed out some things about the plains as described in both the Player's Handbook and Deities and Demigods. Deities and Demigods was renamed as Legend and Lore when they redid all the covers to get rid of the so-called evil influence of the satanic. However, the only thing that was a demon was probably the demon idol on the original Player's Handbook, which I have one that's in pretty good shape here. And the image on the front of the Dungeon Master's Guide is actually an Ifrit, taken from Arabian mythology, similar to genies. And a later one was Greyhawk Adventures. It was also compatible with 2nd edition. And speaking of Greyhawk, there was also the first, I believe it was the first TSR campaign setting, the Greyhawk Gazetteer. Mine's packed away with my nicer stuff. It's in pretty rough shape, but it's one I picked up to replace my original. So you can see there's obviously a lot of different books, but you don't need all of these. You don't need all of these books to play Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. These are just lots of different ideas to help you flesh things out. In this series, I'm going to cover various aspects of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons to help players that want to dig into it, to help address some rules confusion, and to explain the way I learn to play and the way I, in general, tend to still play. All you really need to play are the 3 original books. You can get the 3 original books often at game stores that buy old books, usually for a decent price. You can also try Wayne's books. I'll give a link to his website. He's based out of Arizona. That's where I've gotten some of my resources, like my nicer copy of Deities and Demigods with the Cthulhu mythos, and a few other things. I'll share that in the links below. You can also go to DriveThruRPG and download PDFs of the original books, and several of them, including the 3 core books, you can order print-on-demand copies through DriveThruRPG. I will caution you, there are a few typos here and there. I know, for one, in the player's handbook, the cleric spell progression chart has an asterisk in the wrong spot, so it's pretty easy to figure out that it's wrong, but if you're not paying attention, it could add to some confusion. There are several options if you can't get your hands on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or you want to make resources available for others and not have to worry about violating copyright rules and regulations. For example, Osric, the old school reference and index compilation. This was originally developed as a way to point out that game supplements like modules and so forth were compatible with Osric. Osric is a retroclone of first edition AD&D. People started playing it as a game, and so they updated the second edition, and the good thing about this is it's much more organized, but they have changed several things, which I'll be talking about when I discuss Osric more in depth to compare it to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Similarly is Swords and Wizardry Complete. Swords and Wizardry has a core, a white box, and the complete version. The complete is closest to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It was developed by Matt Finch, who is also one of the main authors behind Osric. And it was definitely designed from the beginning to be played. The last major retro clone that gets a lot of discussion online is Labyrinth Lord. This is the recent reprint that takes the Advanced Labyrinth Lord is a reprint of Labyrinth Lord. Originally it was called Advanced Edition Companion, and it is comparable to AD&D. I've not really played Labyrinth Lord, but Labyrinth Lord, Swords and Wizardry Complete, and Osric are the 3 main contenders for retro clones for AD&D. And also, by way of being complete, the first 3 little books and all the supplements combined basically give you what was laid out in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So that would be another option. And the original 3 books and all supplements are also available through DriveThruRPG, and I believe at least the original 3, if not all, are also available as print on demand. I'll have links to all these down below. You can find Follow Me and Die at my blog, followmeanddie.com, here on YouTube, and on Anchor and other places where my podcast is syndicated, such as iTunes. And you can find me on various sites where you see my social media avatar by the amazing Satine Phoenix. I have a social page on my blog that directs to all my various social media. To get more of my thoughts and opinions in the realm of RPGs and games, check out my other sites. I also contribute to Multiverse.world by the new TSR. If you like the podcast and the other things I share online, there are a few ways you can support my efforts. First of all, tell me and tell others. Just getting the word out is important. Consider backing my Patreon. Patrons get a vote on what PDF I publish next on One Bookshelf. You can check out my first RPG-related PDFs on DriveThruRPG. Many of them are pay what you want, and 2 of them have achieved Copper Seller status. I'm also working on a card game that I hope to kickstart in the first quarter of 2020. You can find the sign-up for the announcement mailing list on my blog. I also have a Teespring store where you can get a shirt with my logo, the same one by Satine Phoenix. Thank you all for watching, and game on.